Italy is one of the most influential countries throughout history. Although, truth be told, the idea of Italy itself was created according to the outbreak of a nationalism based on the resurgence of what was once the great Roman Empire. Are you interested in learning about the unification process of this great nation, as well as the period known as the Kingdom of Italy? Alright, then stay until the end of the video. To put us in context, let's go back to the end of the Napoleonic Wars. After the French defeat during the Congress of Vienna, the new borders of Europe would be established, and in the case of the current Italian territory, in which various states had participated on both sides, it would finally be divided into 7 states. The Kingdom of Piedmont and Sardinia, from the Italian House of Savoy. The Lombard-Venetian Kingdom, which became part of the territory of the Austrian Empire. The duchies of Parma, Modena, and Tuscany, under Austrian influence with rulers from the House of Habsburg, the Papal States, under the rule of the Pope of the Church from Rome, and the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies, under the House of Bourbon. It should be noted that a feeling of nationalism had been emerging since the Italian Renaissance. Ideas of unification of all Italian peoples, recalling the Golden Age of Rome, were seen in art and literature, and would be further embodied during the course of the 18th century. These concepts led to revolts against Austrian absolutism, like the ones in Naples and Piedmont in 1820 and 1830, inspired by Spain. These protests ended with heightened Austrian efforts to prevent future dissent, but the first relevant step towards unification, which according to Italian historiography is known as the Risorgimento, would take place during the Revolution of 1848, in which the Kingdom of Sardinia declares war on the hegemonic Austria, with the support of the Duchy of Tuscany. Here the participation of the revolutionary Giuseppe Mazzini stands out, who would even go on to found a fleeting and unrecognized Roman Republic from the Papal States. Although, as I said, fleeting and in general, the revolt would be crushed. Italy alone was not enough to defeat the Austrian giant. After the defeat, the King of Sardinia abdicated, which would bring Victor Emmanuel II to power, who along with his Prime Minister Camillo Benso would be the architects of the second attempt at unification, but this time seeking a heavyweight ally, the Second French Empire of Napoleon III, whom they would support in the Crimean War, although they would not fully convince them of their support after a secret defense treaty in which Sardinia would cede Nice and Savoy. With this, France provided its support to Sardinia during the Second War of Independence, in which they managed to defeat the Austrians, although only up to taking Lombardy, leaving Veneto still under Austrian sovereignty, as Napoleon wanted to avoid the intervention of the northern Germans. Yes, you always have to pay attention to your entire geopolitical board. Immediately, the northern central duchies, Parma, Modena, and Tuscany, where nationalism was also stoked, would voluntarily join Sardinia in the eyes of a weakened Austria that had lost influence in the region. Of course, the exception of France, despite having ceded territory, infuriated more than one nationalist, like the revolutionary Giuseppe Garibaldi, who was born in Nice. Garibaldi would be the architect of the final phase of the Risorgimento by organizing the Expedition of the Thousand, in which with a large contingent of red shirts, they land in unstable Sicily, and in less than a year, he manages to conquer the entire Kingdom of the Two Sicilies, annexing it to the Kingdom of Sardinia, with which the entire Italian peninsula, except for Veneto and the Pope's Rome, would be unified. Victor Emmanuel would meet in February 1861 in Turin with the representatives of the annexed states, assuming the title of King of Italy. The country of the Azzurri was born, and given that the alliances have just also begun, let's look for the other country that is also in the process of unification, and that has Austria as a detractor. Prussia. Done. Support in the Austro-Prussian War, in which Austria is attacked on 2 fronts. With this victory, Austria is excluded from German unification, and the Veneto region is handed over to Italy, and the friendship with Prussia would be maintained to conquer the last and coveted goal, Rome. still under the power of the Pope and under the protection of French troops. And speaking of France, it would start a war against Prussia for which the troops in Rome would have to mobilize. Perfect opportunity with which the taking of Rome would occur, ending the 1,116-year reign of the Holy See. And the resurgence had been realized. Like every new nation, Italy would start with a period of some instability, given that like every movement, unification also had certain detractors. In addition, governments known as the historical right and left alternated, which kept Italy's economic lag compared to other powers. In 1878, after the death of Victor Emmanuel II, Umberto I of Italy would come to power. Umberto, along with his prime minister, sought Italy's participation in the imperialism that would materialize during the partition of Africa, embodied in the Berlin Conference, where the European powers agreed on the colonization zones, and of which Italy, less influential than other powers, would start its colonial empire only with Eritrea, part of present-day Somalia, and in theory, Abyssinia, present-day Ethiopia. In theory, because there was a formed state, unlike the vast majority of African regions, Ethiopia would show resistance that led to the Italo-Ethiopian War, in which the Italians were expelled after an attempt to invade the Amharic country. In the midst of the colonial expansion of the powers of Europe, military alliances would begin to form. In the case of Italy, it would be with its old ally, Germany, and with Austria-Hungary. Although, of course, the differences with the latter over the irredentist territories of Trieste and Trentino would persist over time. Economic stagnation and the poor quality of life of the Italians fueled revolts of emerging ideologies such as socialism, which led to the creation of unions. In response to the repression of these revolts, Umberto would be assassinated by an anarchist in 1900. The assassinated king would be succeeded by his son, Victor Emmanuel III, whose government, along with Prime Minister Giovanni Giolitti, achieved strong economic growth and the empowerment of the militia. Of course, the differences between the richer north and the more rural and backward south would become more pronounced from here. Differences that remain to this day. The new militia would be approved during the Italo-Turkish War, in which, in an attempt to continue expanding the Italian Empire, Italy invades the Ottoman regions of Tripolitania and Cyrenaica, managing to defeat the declining Ottomans and thus annex the current Libya. In the face of constant tensions between the European powers, the balance of power would be broken after the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo, and thus the start of World War I. Although Italy was part of the Triple Alliance, it claimed that the treaty was defensive in nature, thus maintaining its neutrality. However, in the face of British offers to recover Italian territories still under Austrian control, Italy would end up joining the side of the Allies in 1915 from the Italian front. Although it first suffered a harsh setback in the Battle of Caporetto, the Austro-Hungarians, now without German support, are defeated in Vittorio Veneto, thus sealing the victory on this front. Despite this victory, after the Treaty of Versailles, Italy would only gain Trentino and Venezia Giulia. Dalmatia would be handed over to the emerging Yugoslavia, alluding to the weak support that Italy had provided to the Allies. Logically, this would be seen as a betrayal. This widespread discontent would further exalt Italian nationalism, leading to the formation of organizations such as the Fasci di Combattimento, an ultra-nationalist organization led by a former socialist who had served in the war, the well-known Benito Mussolini. This organization would even have its own paramilitary combat group, the Black Shirts. In a short time, the Fascio would become a political party that would quickly gain popularity to the point that by the end of 1922, the March on Rome would be organized, through which 30,000 people mobilized in different cities and under the threat of a civil war demanded the annulment of the parliamentary system. The event concluded with Mussolini's rise to power as president of the Council of Ministers, completely overshadowing the monarchy. The fascist ideology would be based mainly on an exacerbated nationalism, which would place the Duce as a figure to admire. and that Italy should recover the greatness of the ancient Roman Empire at all costs. In addition, it would continue to incorporate the cult of violence and contempt for the bourgeoisie and Marxism. But of course, like any authoritarian regime seeking to implement an ideology, it needed popular support. And with an excellent mass mover in the same capital, Mussolini would get the support of the Catholic Church through the Lateran Pacts, in which the Vatican City that we know today would be created, in addition to compensation for its territorial losses in 1876. For its part, the Church would recognize the legitimacy of the Italian state and therefore its followers as well. At this point, fascism had already become a totalitarian regime, and under a series of highly questioned reforms, economic progress would be achieved that would be mainly destined for the modernization of the army. Yes, the quality of life for Italians had to wait. First, the expansion. And it would continue during the second invasion of Abyssinia, in which, without prior war notice, Italy attacks Ethiopia again. This time with greater success and carrying out a real massacre that left more than 750,000 dead. With this, the annexation of Ethiopia would be achieved, thus creating Italian East Africa, with Victor Emmanuel III as Emperor of Ethiopia. The last notable event of the interwar period would be the well-known alliance with the leader of Nazism, Adolf Hitler, in 1936, with whom, although both regimes had things in common, the truth is that their ultimate goals would have ended up clashing. In short, it could be said they sealed their friendship by jointly intervening in the Spanish Civil War in support of dictator Franco. And as you may already know, the drums of war would begin to sound from the German invasion of the Sudetenland, which would be imitated by Italy when it invaded Albania in April 1939 and turned it into a protectorate. Months later, with the invasion of Poland, World War II would break out and the alliances formed would be activated. However, just like in the First World War, Italy would remain neutral until the successful German conquest of France and the Benelux, at which point Mussolini would fully enter the war. Il Duce would go all out to restore the greatness of Rome. His first move was the invasion of the French Alps, after which he only managed to annex the border areas without much success. Then Italy would manage to annex French Somalia, British France, and some areas of Kenya and Sudan. Although, of course, without an entrance through the Suez Canal under British control, Italian Africa would not last long. So Italy launches a campaign to invade Egypt, and here begin the misadventures of a hasty Italy without much material for war. This is followed by a failed and isolated invasion of Greece, former Roman territory, and Malta, but nothing British. These defeats, like those in North Africa, would involve the Germans, who also did not notify their allies of the plans on a new front, the Soviet Union. Yes, poor coordination that would cost them dearly. By domino effect, Ethiopia would manage to expel the Italians and free itself at the same time as the Allies managed to advance in North Africa, even taking the Italian colony of Libya. By 1943, Italy had already been expelled from the Balkans and lost all its colonial positions. With this, the Allies would counterattack, invading Sicily and taking southern Italy, thus putting the king and Pietro Badoglio, a former combatant, in power as prime minister. Mussolini would be imprisoned and then rescued by Hitler, who would occupy the north, thus founding the puppet state of the Salo Republic with Mussolini in power. With a divided Italy, the Italian Civil War would take place, in which the weakened Axis powers fall before the Allied superiority, and shortly before wishing for victory, Il Duce would be shot and hanged in Milan by Italian partisans. With the imminent defeat of the Axis, all of Italy would end up on the Allied side, so its only continental loss would be part of Venetia Julia, handed over to Yugoslavia, and it even managed to keep Italian Somalia until its independence. After a 1946 plebiscite, the Italians decided to become a republic that remains to this day, seeing Il Duce's dream shattered by the bloodshed of millions of his compatriots. What do you think? Do you believe that in some way Mussolini could have restored the splendor of ancient Rome to Italy? Or was he doomed to fail from the start? Don't forget to leave your comment, and if you liked this video, support me with a like and subscribe to my channel. And if you want to support this project, any donation on Patreon will be welcome. See you next time. Thanks for watching the video.